Hi, I'm Brittney Saunders and welcome to Big Business, the place where business is far from boring. And today I'm recording on Gadigal land. Now, I somehow managed to build an empire from the garage underneath my house, and I'm here to share it all with you, from the wins, the mistakes, the challenging times, and the funny moments in between. So whether you're in business already, perhaps you're not in the game at all, maybe you're just looking for some inspo, or you simply just want to hear the tea, this is the podcast for you. Coming up on today's episode, I'm joined by two special guests. Their names are Emma and Sarah. They are an Aussie sister duo behind the podcast Interview Boss. Their mission is to empower job seekers with the advice, inspiration, and insider knowledge they need to take charge of their careers. From nailing interviews to landing dream jobs, these two are here to help you become the boss of your career. I'm especially excited to be having these two on the pod today because I feel like I'm going to be able to share my insights from a hiring perspective, and also maybe I'm going to learn a thing or two from them as well. So, Sarah and Emma, welcome to Big Business.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're happy to be here. I've actually followed you for a very long time.
Oh, really?
I dug up the data the other day on YouTube. It was 2013 in June or something that I followed you on YouTube.
Oh my goodness.
She pulled out the
and
receipt.
now I'm
Fun
back
is
on
that?
YouTube again.
It's
So
so
this is full circle.
And also, I have been obsessed with Mac Velvet Teddy for so many
yeah.
years. And I feel like it was you that got me onto it.
Back
So,
in the day.
Yeah.
I still wear that every now and then.
OG
It's a
beauty
superior
influencer.
lipstick.
It is.
Everyday
it is.
wear.
Oh, well, I'm so excited to chat with you both. Obviously, I've done a little bit of research on what both of you do, and I feel like you speak my language with everything that you talk about. So I feel like this pod could go for hours, but we won't do that to poor Xander because he'll have to edit for hours. But let's just jump straight into it. We did send over like a few questions before you both came into the studio today, and one thing that stood out to me in your notes that you sent to us was why you shouldn't try and be what you think they want to hire.
Yeah.
Yes, this is huge. So it's really hard when people are going through interviews, maybe getting knocked back, and they want to ask for feedback because they want to know if there's something they can improve on. But a lot of the time, there's not something specific they can give. It could just be a vibe that someone else just had that little bit more experience. So if you take a little piece of feedback that you're given and make that your entire new personality, take it completely on, you're doing yourself a disservice because then you're going to the next interview and maybe what you've just morphed yourself into isn't what they're looking for.
And the original you would have been better. Like imagine you get feedback that you were too enthusiastic in the interview.
And
so
then
you
you're going
dial
to
it way
take that
back.
Yes.
and go, I'm going
Yeah.
to dial it down for
Yeah.
the next one.
And then
And
you
the
seem
next
dull
one-
and they're like, they didn't have enough passion. Like it's an endless pursuit of just morphing yourself into the wrong person.
Yeah.
So
And we just think you want to get a job for who you really are and the way that you normally show up. People are trying to get a sense of what you're going to be like to actually work with. I'm sure you can kind of relate, Britt, doing interviews yourself. You're going to be spending a lot of time with this person.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
You want to actually know, are they going to get along in this role with all the people that they have to deal with? Is that going to be a fit? And if they're acting really differently in the interview to how they are normally, that's not going to give you a really good idea.
Yeah, I think from my experience, and one thing that like I guess business owners probably don't talk about enough, but it's real and it happens, is how many people actually just lie their way through the entire interview process.
Yes.
And I get people want to make a great impression and like you're showing up as your best self.
Yes. Yeah.
And like people very much always say exactly what you want to hear.
Yeah.
And then when you're in that interview, you've got to take that for exactly what it is. Like if they're just
Yeah.
saying everything you want to hear.
Yeah.
But we like admittedly have had people lie their way through the entire interview process. And then when they start working for us,
You've been catfished.
No, genuinely, I'm like, this person is not like anything like they
Yeah.
interviewed. And then you're stuck with this person and you've got to
Yes.
figure out how the fuck
It's
do
a
we go
waste of
from-
everyone's time.
It is. And I get it from a sense where if people are like really desperate to get the job and they want to land it, they want their dream role or whatever, like they're gonna say all the right things.
Yeah.
But in the long run, like sometimes that doesn't
And
work
also,
out.
they've also had a bad experience then too of starting. Who wants to start and disappoint everyone in your brand new job and then potentially have that role end sooner than it was meant to? Then you've got to explain that in your next interview, maybe lie about it again. Like it becomes a snowball.
It's a slippery slope, honestly, because you want to impress the person that's interviewing you But man, I'm just like, don't fucking lie, because we have dealt with that so many times, and then it's really sticky when you come to that realization as the employer. Holy shit, this person is not who we thought they were.
Is it skill things that people are kind of overplaying, or
I would just say not so much skill, more so like personality, I want to say, or or just the way that they claim to work, and then they get the job and they're not doing the job the way that they said they would. And it's just that's like one of the hardest parts of, I think the hardest part of business is staffing. Like that's my hardest challenge. Like I'll take anything else, like logistics, finance, whatever. Staffing is the hardest part, and I'm sure a lot of owners would agree with me. But just dealing with people lying in interviews is like a part of business that is so like prevalent, but no one talks about it.
What we get a real sense of is the other side of when people are applying for jobs and there's someone who is so talented and so good at what they do, and how they can slowly get sucked a little bit into starting to lie or starting to pretend or starting to cover something up or hide something because they see bad advice and they hear bad things, or they're thinking, okay, so this job finished up earlier than I thought it was going to. I don't want to tell them that, so I'm going to pretend that I'm still there. And then when you find out that they're not there anymore, they're like, oh, I don't know what to do. They haven't thought ahead. So what we talk about is talking about the elephant in the room. In your intro, when you first go into the interview, talk about that thing that you were tempted to hide. Because if you don't, it can then tie you up. You've got to make up stories. You've got to talk about other things. You've got to explain suddenly why you can't get a reference from that job. You've got to explain your whole scenario.
And half the time, the reasons that people are so nervous about something, it might be like a career gap on their resume or getting let go because it just wasn't a good fit. They're so stressed about it. But if you say it in the right way, it's so not a big deal. Whether that's like, hey, I actually had a career break because I went traveling, or I needed to look after a family.
It's better to be honest. And I think as well, they don't have to give like all of the personal details. Of
one sentence.
Just keep it simple, and then once you get the job, then later we can find out the tea of what happened at your last workplace.
But imagine like in a world where you're having people lie and saying all the things you want to hear, someone shows up and says, yeah, I started this job. I thought it was going to be this and it really wasn't. So I decided to leave there and I'm looking for something like this now.
Done.
Imagine
like
how refreshing
that's
that
just simple. Like instead someone might be like, oh, this and that happened. And like some of the stuff that we've heard, it's just like mind blowing. And I even fear with, references as well. Like people can lie with who their references are. Like, and I think this happens all the time. We've probably experienced it ourselves. Like just putting like, this was my old manager at XYZ, but it's their auntie. Or like their bestie at work, and they just, so you got to be so careful when you're hiring to ask the right questions to references as well, because people can be like, yeah, she was great, we loved her, but I want to be specific and ask about the role. Because then you will catch out. You will catch out if someone is just a fake reference. But it's genuinely petrifying, like being an employer and hiring a new employee is scary.
There's so much trust.
So much trust. And it blows my mind, honestly, how much people can just fuck things up if they have lied through their interview. And it's not spoken about enough.
And the impact that has on the rest of the team as well. To train the person.
The stories I have, but I refrain from telling them. But like one person can come in and fuck up the whole workplace.
Change the whole culture. Suddenly people are creating little cliques to talk about each other.
Hostility. And it can just be one person. And then you've got to go in and do damage control. Like it's just the unspoken part of business.
Although what's worse from an HR perspective is when someone comes in and it's not working and nobody does anything about it. That is so damaging to the culture, because the rest of your team who are doing really well at their role,
they're ticking time bombs. They're like, I want out because Lisa
I'm doing all
is
the
not
work.
doing her job.
That's right.
Come on, Lisa. But this is the thing as well. So like Fate isn't a small business anymore. Like I still feel small in the sense that like we've got our eyes on everything. We haven't become so big that we don't know what's going on. And we're massive on, if something happens, like we need to be able to identify it immediately and take action immediately and start talking about it and get involved. And I often wonder, and I think of like bigger, especially like in retail, I think of bigger companies and just some of the stuff that we've had to deal with, and we deal with things like really swiftly when there's like conflict or hostility or whatever. Touch wood, we don't ever want to have to experience that, but that's a part of business. Like you can't avoid it.
It's humans working together.
Yeah. I often think, you know, when we've had these scenarios happen and we're in there straight away and we resolve it in 2 weeks kind of thing, I wonder about, you know, bigger companies. Like no wonder you hear horror stories about, you know, huge retailers, because when a company is so big, like things can go unnoticed. I'm really grateful that Fate is at the size that it is, where we are still so involved like in everything. And if something is happening in one of our stores, like we know about it immediately.
And people feel like they can reach out to you. I've been in HR in head office for large retailers.
Oh, there you go.
And and that often you'll hear people say, oh, but this has been happening and they haven't done anything. They, like as in the company, hasn't done anything.
The powers
and
that
I'm
be.
going, this is literally the first I've ever heard about this issue.
And that's
like
the tricky thing. I think like you hear so many nightmare
Yeah.
stories, like working here's fucked and working there it's toxic. But like I know for a fact with like issues that we've dealt with, our staff have felt really caught off guard that we have jumped onto it straight away and been like, look, we know this is happening, because maybe they've come from working at big retailers where they could get away with taking the piss, being late, and no one would notice. And so it kind of throws them off and they're like, well, why am I getting in trouble?
Their regional manager visited once every 3 months.
Exactly.
Or something.
Whereas, you know, our national manager, Grace, is so involved because we've only got the 5 stores. So she's just there all the time.
Nothing gets past Grace.
No, Grace is coming in hot, you know, and that's the difference. And I think, it just actually makes me not scared, but, you know, I never want Fate to become that big of a company that we become like that, where things can happen so easily and I wouldn't be aware kind of thing. So I guess it's good for me to be, I guess, building these foundations now that we're at this size, and hopefully we can continue this. Whereas these other big companies have been around for decades or, you know, so it's like too late to turn it back.
It is.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it comes down to management leadership, the team that you've got in your store leadership and who else is around that. The vast majority of leaders, particularly in retail, but also every industry, honestly, like some places where they've had plenty of training, everybody is terrified of any tiny little conflict. They don't want to talk about it. It's too hard. They don't know how to bring it up. They're terrified.
Hard conversations, easy life.
Yeah.
It's my motto. Easy conversations, hard life.
Totally. And that's honestly my reason for existing as HR when you come into a business, is trying to work with a manager and say, okay, have you thought about phrasing it like this? Oh, I don't know. Like,
I don't want to upset her.
Yeah. And you're
I'd
like,
rather do nothing.
Yeah.
And you can model the conversation. What about if you approached it this way? What about if you said this? Oh, well, that doesn't sound too bad. Okay, do you want me to sit in with you? Like, you're really holding their hand. I think that's the way to overcome it, is you've got to have managers and leaders who are happy to have those conversations up front, because that's not the norm, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And
I know, because everyone doesn't want to upset someone. Oh, I don't want to throw her under the bus. Or they come to you and they're like, this has happened, but don't say my name.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, we've got to say the name. Like, because we need to fix this so that you can all be happy.
yeah, that's right.
Hello, it's producer Xander back on the mic
Hey,
in
Xander.
2025. I wanted to touch on what you just spoke about, because I've been through a process in a previous workplace where I've had to deal with HR and conflict and that sort of thing. But like, I find an interesting perspective is that as someone who is kind of like a victim of bad behavior, I certainly felt a fear of approaching HR, because you don't want to be the problem. So I think a lot of the time that when there's issues, they're not being solved because people are so kind of petrified on looking like they're the drama.
But from my standpoint, and again, I can only speak from like Fate and the way our company is, like I want our staff to know it doesn't matter how big or small the problem is. Even if you're coming to us and you feel like, oh God, I'm going to start all this drama. I'm going to love the fact that you reached out to us because we want to resolve it and have everyone getting along. But again, it might be different for bigger companies where, you know, the HR might not care as much, or I don't know.
I think you have to know the culture a little bit. That's what I would say. You have to kind of work out whether you ask someone, whether you kind of pay attention to the way that things work. What are the kind of things that they're talking about, saying about, doing training on? Because HR is often led by the leaders above. So we get such a bad rap. Any like social media post about HR, everybody always jumps in. HR's for the business, not for you. They're out to get you. And I'm like, do you know what that's like? To like work so hard to care about the employees, and you're the one fighting, going, you can't do that. We have to do this for them. And then everyone in the comments of every post is like, you're evil. It's kind of crazy.
Avoid you like the plague at the Christmas party.
It's the CEO. Like, it's not me. I'm arguing against him to get the right thing done.
I think it's also like a few bad eggs in HR
Of course.
in certain
Oh,
places.
yeah. It just depends on the company and
also
who is in HR.
Shoot the messenger too. Because I've had to do stuff where I'm like, this is a horrible situation that I'm having to put this person through and go through a restructure or a performance situation or whatever. I'm not the one who's made the call. I just have been told this is what you have to deliver. I get to do it in the nicest way I can. But I'd say if you read the room of what the vibe is like, a lot of time you can go to HR and say, hey, I don't necessarily need to make a formal complaint or do anything. I just wanted some advice on this is going on. What do you think I should do? Should I talk to my manager? Should I talk to this person? Like, how should I kind of go about this myself to begin with? And if you're talking to them at that early point, I think that can be really beneficial because it gets you the benefit of like actually getting an outside perspective.
Yep.
And I'm often able to say, oh, have you talked to this manager? Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Do you think that, I didn't think that they would care or whatever. No, you should definitely talk to them about it. That can be really helpful as like before it gets to that point where you're having to make it more formal.
Yeah.
You can kind of just check in.
I get what you mean, Xander, though. It does sometimes feel like there's a bit of a dibber-dobber culture. Like, do you want to be that one that ratted out that, you're a bit sensitive and something happened at work? Not that that's the case, but that's the culture sometimes.
That's what I would tell a friend, is to go about it like, hey, I've got this situation. I just wanted to use you as a soundboard. Yeah. I think that's a really great way to go about it. And you'll get a vibe from them then of like, was that helpful or was it not? And then you'll know whether you should continue to use that support or not.
At the start of each year, I sit down with our like head office team and do like a big presentation and all that kind of stuff. And one thing that I put to my team this year, our word of the year is actually pioneer.
Oh,
I
like that.
Be a pioneer, because a lot of our staff, they're in creative roles.
Yeah.
And I really want to foster a workplace that isn't just me saying, this is what we're doing, off you go, everyone.
Yeah.
Like, I want people to be decision makers and be innovative and pioneer. Yeah. But one thing that I like really want to see from my team, and that I wish like a lot of employees would kind of open their eyes to, is like how much potential you do have, especially if you are working in a smaller business where the owner is super involved. And I remember like speaking with my team at the start of this year, and especially for those in our marketing team who have their more creative roles. Yeah. And I was just basically saying, like, girls, knock my fucking socks off this year. Like, someone do something. Like, they all do a great job, but just like unlocking that, like your own potential when you're working in a business.
I think there's two frames of mind. If you don't want more out of your career,
exactly,
then none of this.
It's fine.
You're probably not listening to this podcast, to be honest. Yeah. But if you do, you don't have to wait for someone else to give you that opportunity.
Exactly.
You don't have to wait for you to have a good boss, because as we kind of said before, a lot of people, a lot of managers, a lot of bosses don't have those skills. They don't know what to do. They're not thinking about this stuff. Be that good boss for yourself, like you said, and book in that meeting and go, hey, I'd love to talk about our goals for the year. Do you want to think about some of yours? I want to have a meeting with the whole team. Here's my ideas, and create that from you. And now suddenly the whole team's involved and you've got goals. And like,
exactly. I just don't think like staff, like as a whole, realize like if you just do even little things and putting your hand up and showing that initiative, like just how far doing that can take you. And again, like we can't speak for every business, but I know for me personally, if someone's like putting their hand up or always coming up with ideas or just showing that extra bit of initiative,
you want to go to them.
I'm going to take them under my wing and say, let's fucking do this.
Our whole motto of Interview Boss is shoot your shot, and this is perfect for that. You have no idea what the outcome's going to be. What do you have to lose for saying, hey, I've been thinking about this really great idea, or thinking about in my role, maybe I could take on this extra task. What do you think? Like,
Yeah.
get them on board and get them thinking about the goals.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that has really helped me have that kind of mindset and innovate, and something that people can think about whether you're a business owner or working for a business, is to connect yourself with the industry outside of your company. Like, there's so many free webinars or learnings or trainings or things. Get on LinkedIn, start following some companies, start going to stuff and hearing about things. Ask if you can go to a one-day conference, even if it's like an online pass that you get and you watch all the stuff. You get ideas from what other companies are doing and you think, oh, we could do that here, we could add this here. And then suddenly you've got a really cool idea that you can present to your boss, and where you are going, hey, I'm stepping up, I'm doing more. Those are the things that then get you something to put on your resume, something to talk about in an interview, or something to go to your boss with and go, hey, my role's now bigger than what it was a year ago. I want a change of title and a promotion, and here's where I want to go in my career.
And a pay rise. Thank you.
Yeah, totally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, it's just the ball, like, again, for Fate, like the ball is in my staff's court.
Yeah.
Like, and I really try and stress that to them
Yeah.
because I just feel like a lot of people play it safe and they wait for me to say,
Yeah.
okay, this is the next thing that
Yeah.
we're doing.
Yes.
Whereas, like, especially with all these younger companies that we have now, like, there's never been more opportunities than now, I feel, especially like with all the social media roles.
Yeah,
and
it's all
the
creative
roles.
industries.
Yeah.
Like, it's just the world is your oyster.
We tell our cadets and graduates, and this is good advice for anyone, no one will ever care about your development as much as you do, ever. Your boss is not going to care as much about your career as what you do. You've got to be the one to say, hey, I want to do this course. Hey, I want to do this training. Hey, I want to learn from that person. I want to take some time can we use this software that I like? Like, all those different opportunities, you have to be the one to present that idea and take it forward, because you're the one who's going to benefit from that.
Exactly. And I think another thing that a lot of people struggle with, and just things that pop up in my DMs, especially since we've had this podcast, is people who want to be like that, but they're limited by having a terrible CEO or manager, and then them just being completely stuck when they want to be passionate and they want to grow, but the boss is like, no.
Definitely not doing that.
Yeah. And then I think in that instance, you need to get another job somewhere
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
Like, especially if like the manager's that way and the CEO's that way, like nothing's ever really going to change. And
That's
you're
the
not going to be
culture
able
of
to
that
grow.
business.
Yeah.
And even if you did do it, they're not going to be interested or excited about the results that you just got or whatever.
And because a lot of like business owners as well, especially if they are like a little bit older, not to shame people that are a little bit older, but they're very stuck in their ways.
Yeah.
And I think that's how I feel a difference. Like, being a millennial boss is like, I'm more open-minded
Yes.
and I'm so eager for change and growth, like in any area of the business.
Yeah.
Whereas like some more old school kind of business owners.
Middle-aged white man.
Yeah,
He's
they're like,
not
no,
having
this
it.
is the way we do things and that's it, you know.
I think that also really relates to something else we talk about a lot, which I know Em and I have talked about a lot, which is knowing yourself and knowing what you care about in a job and in a business. Because what I see a bit of is people looking through job ads and looking for like a cool job or something that really sounds good, right? It might sound really good, but the culture is one of, we've already worked everything out. You don't need to innovate. Like, we're really innovative as a company, but someone else is doing the innovating. You just need to do this thing over here. And there's a big difference between working for that kind of a company, which sounds good, versus a company which is maybe a bit unsexy on the job ad, but they've got this culture of like, oh, cool idea. Yeah, go for it.
Let's go for it, yeah.
And the best jobs that I've ever had have been the unsexy ones that I wouldn't have thought would be so satisfying from the outside.
Well, I think that's another thing that people can be not misled by, but especially now in this like social media world that we're living in, where businesses are online and their staff are online, and I'm sure this has like happened for us as well, is we have people applying for jobs because they want to work at Fate.
I know, yeah.
And this is, I've spoken about this like ages ago on the pod, and people kind of take it the wrong way. But, you know, we have people apply for jobs with us and they go, I want to work at Fate. I love Brittney. and we say, you're an immediate no.
Yes.
Not because, you know, we don't love that. We want people to love the brand. And if they just so happen to love me, that's fine. But if that's their only reason
Can't
for
love the
applying,
job for the sake of loving the vibe.
no, exactly. And because they're going to be disappointed, because I think, you know, we post all the fun shit on social media, but that is a smither of our day.
Yes.
And I think people, like, especially like coming to work in our warehouse and stuff, where they see like our crazy warehouse TikTok videos, we do that once a week for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
the rest of the time we're sweating and working our ass off in the warehouse. And I reckon people have applied and got the job and then they work for 2 weeks and they go, actually, this isn't for me, because it's actually like physical and hard and lifting boxes and stuff. So that's another thing I think everyone needs to be mindful of. Like when you are seeing all these cool online businesses, and we're a cool business and we have fun and all that, but it's not social media in real life. And I think social media can make businesses look like that's all you do.
Yeah. I think that's on business a bit too, to put that stuff in the ad.
Oh, yeah.
I think ads should say, here's why you might not like this job. Because transparency works both ways.
100%.
Like, you want to be putting off the wrong kind of people from applying. Hey, if you don't like getting sweaty, if you don't like working in a dusty environment, if you don't like whatever the things are, then you might not like this job.
Exactly. And we've had to be like so mindful of doing that in our interviewing as well. Like especially when we're interviewing for the warehouse, like, are you fine with being on your feet for 8 hours at a time? Are you fine? Like we ask all these questions because we don't want someone to just be applying because they saw us dancing in the warehouse on TikTok.
Yeah.
Because they'll come in and go, where are they? Like
we're there to dance for 8
we're
hours.
there for 5 seconds to film the video and then we're straight back on our laptops.
I did my hair for the day. Where's the camera?
Where's the tripod?
And so I'm so with you on that. Like, you want to work at a cool place that you love and admire, but it's not always going to be TikTok.
I think that's an example for you, Em. Like working in radio, people must think like, oh, that's going to be this fun all the time.
Yeah, and it is. I love it, but definitely unglamorous elements, like running from my desk where I write the news into the studio because I'm constantly late writing news at the last minute. Yeah, deadlines, stress, burnout of like the kind of stories that I cover. Like it's very unsexy sometimes.
Even fashion is completely unsexy. Like there is, I shared a meme on my story the other day. It's like me when I'm making reels and the cartoon was all glam. And it's like me 99% of the other time. And it's like just
the
ratty. Yeah. Because it's not glamorous. And social media can make workplaces look like it's glam. But I'll be the first to say like, we all know social media is like fake, essentially. Not that we're fake people. But like running a fashion business is far from glamorous. Like it's hard work, it's stressful, like it's all the things.
Yeah. I think there's something you touched on where people say, this is why I want to work here. It's because of I love Fate and I love Britt. I think that's something else I've spoken to a lot of people who have a genuine interest for some reason, but then they feel the pressure to say, this is my dream job. They feel like that's what the person hiring them wants them to say. Like that's the only answer to why do you want to work here? Oh, I've always wanted to work here. I've worked for some companies, again, like I said, that are unsexy. And you say, oh, why are you interested in the job? Oh, I've always wanted to work here. Well, that's just a lie.
But do we really know what our dream job is when we're in our 20s and 30s? Like really, if you want to think about it? Like sure, you can think it's a really cool job.
Yeah.
But a lot of people do say...
Who wants to work at all?
Hello.
I don't dream of labour.
So true.
I dream of laying on a beach. There's no such thing as a dream
I always say
job.
on our podcast, I'm like, it was never meant to be this deep. We're meant to be in a field picking berries. Like, it's really not that deep. But anyway, here we are. So we'll make do.
It's helpful to keep in mind sometimes of like it's not that serious.
Yeah.
It was never meant to be this
that's
serious.
what I always say too if we're dealing with like any sort of like conflict or whatever. I'm like, at the
good
end
to
of the
zoom
day,
out.
we are selling clothes. Like it is not that deep.
Totally.
Let's all just calm down.
If
and
we sell a few less tops, no one's going to die.
it's all good.
It's all right if the marketing had a mistake in it. Like nobody's...
It's not that deep.
Totally. I've said the same thing to many people in many companies in retail industries or things like that where you're like, we're selling this. Like, it's not that urgent. It's not an emergency. No one's going to pass away if you don't answer your phone at 7 p.m. at night. It's okay.
100%. I'm with you on that.
Britt, I'm really curious as someone who hires a lot, what are the things that you notice that people do when they're coming in for an interview that is something that you go, oh, that's someone that I don't want to hire or that's not quite the right fit?
Oh, there's a lot. I would say back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this episode, like people just going way over the top and just giving you every single answer in the most perfect way. And you can just kind of tell like you're like just saying, you're saying exactly what I want to hear. Another one would probably be like we do a lot of personality questions for our roles at Fate. Like, again, we're looking for a good culture fit. But when people go a bit too rogue with their answers, an easy question that we ask is, how would your friends describe you in 3 words? Because we just want to like hear a bit about their personality. And like with a question like that, I would say like be honest, but like also play it safe.
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised, like some people say like a bit arrogant and like, you know, they go really
I was
honest.
not expecting that.
They like, I can't think of what people have said, but
Do you know what I think in those situations though? I'm grateful that you said that.
You exposed yourself.
because if people have said, you know, I'm
if
a
I
bit
told
wild.
you not to say that, like you obviously think that that's true, and it's helpful information for me to have. Actually,
100%.
They're like a bit aggro, you know.
Yeah, well, they'll say like wild or, you know, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, don't think you should be saying that to us right now.
Yeah.
So be honest, but maybe just refrain when it comes to those kind of questions.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I would say is a bit of a, not so much a red flag in interviewing, but if someone is talking a lot terribly about their current workplace or the past one, like
Yeah,
if they're
for
saying,
sure.
oh, like I worked there, it was so toxic, blah, blah, blah. Like
Yes.
again, you can say something about why you're not working somewhere anymore, but maybe just keep it light.
One sentence,
Keep
yeah.
it light for the first
Save
interview.
the trauma dump for your bestie on the phone. Like,
Exactly.
leave that at the door. Yeah.
What are things that you notice?
Well, we see that come up a lot when people are terrified to say anything bad about their current workplace, actually. And almost it goes the other way. So the advice that you've just given, there's some people that are listening to this right now and they're going to take that as, I can't say a single, even neutral thing about their workplace. And so then they tie themselves up in knots to say, oh, well, I just need a new challenge. And it's like, oh, but you left there with no other job. Like, are you sure? And then you feel like, I'm missing something. Like there's a gap to this story. It doesn't make sense. Like,
And you
I
never
can't
want to
work
let
out.
the interviewer fill in those gaps themselves and go, oh, maybe they got fired for something really awful, like indecency at work or something. You want to be honest so that they don't have to run their mind of what it could be.
Yeah, and tying themselves up in knots then, not being able to tell their story or having a gap or not giving enough detail. There's so many things that people kind of get tied up with that intro thing about where they're at the moment. But I think the biggest thing for us is that people prepare for job interviews completely backwards, completely the wrong way. And what do we hear the most often where people say how they've done their prep?
Every single person without fail Googles common interview questions.
I know.
Top 10 interview questions. And they're always
What are your strengths
and weaknesses. Get in
Oh
the
my
bin.
God.
It's the worst.
See, we don't ask any of those kinds of
Yes.
questions.
And I feel like they're
Most
not that
people
common.
don't.
And every interview coaching session I do, people will say, oh, but what do I say for weaknesses? And I'm like, well, do you have something in mind? And they're like, oh, yeah, I was going to say this. And I'm like, great. I don't think it's actually going to come up.
No, I feel like
so-
no one asks those questions now.
Sure, you don't want to be put on the spot and like, oh, I have no idea. I've never thought about this before. And then you panic. Like we try and avoid that like thinking on the spot because under pressure, nobody's brain works properly. So you want to have something in mind. But who's going to hire someone just based off a strengths and weaknesses question?
No one. No one cares
No.
about your strengths and weaknesses.
And
even if you're being asked, like I feel like they're just
Yeah.
asking that to tick boxes. And I'd say on that as well, another thing that we notice in interviews, obviously people are nervous when they're being interviewed. Like everyone's nervous when they're interviewing. And like in my experience, you'll notice that people will try to like overcompensate that nervousness. And then you ask them one question where it could be like a couple of sentences for the answer, but then they'll like ramble and go in circles and end up somewhere, 2,000 kilometers away from the question.
Yeah.
And so my advice to people would be like, take your time when you're answering questions in an interview. Like take a second to breathe.
Ask them to repeat the question.
Yeah.
Say, oh, do you mind if I have a think about that? Hey, I have a notebook. I'm just going to have a look at my notes for a second. How much better is that going to be
Then them going, blah, 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 and then all of a sudden they're telling you your life story and you're like, wait, what did we even ask them? Like, how have we got to this point?
It's because they don't have a good solid answer. And so then they say something and they feel like it's not enough. So they add something else and then they didn't tell it right. So they have to add context and they get themselves into a real situation.
It's like a snowball and it keeps getting bigger. And then they're like, some people even go, oh my God, sorry, like I'm rambling and I don't even know what I'm saying anymore.
Yeah.
So my advice is just like breathe, take your time.
Yeah.
Like they're so nervous, but you need to know like us on the other end, like we're
Your
not,
people,
like we're just
Yeah.
happy to chat. And another thing, like I would say as well is ask questions. We always finish our interviews with, do you have any questions for us at all? And that is always such a good sign if someone has come prepared with questions. So I would say even if you don't get asked, do you have any questions for us? Have something prepared that you want to ask at the end, even if they don't give you the opportunity. I would
bring
say
them in a notebook. I think people think to themselves, what's a good question to ask? And they Google again, what's a good question to ask?
And they
the
get the most standard
And they're
ones.
thinking, what's a question that's going to sound good? And it's kind of like they're not even listening to the answer. They just asked it to look good and to ask the question. The biggest thing, our advice when it comes to picking a question to ask at the end is you have to be actually genuinely curious about it. What do you actually want to know about this company, about this team? If you've worked in an environment where they didn't love your ideas and you're the kind of person that likes innovation, ask them about that. Hey, when's the last time someone had a cool idea and you ran with it? And whose idea was it? If you really like a boss who gives you feedback, hey, how do you deliver feedback to your team? Like, you have to start from something that you actually want to know. I think that's so game changer when the question, you can tell they actually care about it and it's come from, hey, I like to do things like this. What's your approach here?
And to help you get inspired, imagine if you were to start working there tomorrow. What do you genuinely want to know? Like, if you're going to start work tomorrow, you have no questions, you know everything, you're just going to rock up and that's insane. Like, if you were actually going to start working there, what do you want to know? Maybe how do the departments collaborate together? Like, if you're in sales, how do you work with promotions or what's that interconnecting link?
And we have actually like a free download of like 70 plus questions you can ask at the end as for inspiration. But our caveat on that is don't start there and be like, which ones sound good?
Yeah, no, you've got to find a question that you're interested in. And I think even if at the end of an interview, there's no time or there's no opportunity, they don't say, do you have any questions for us? I think you need to be the one to say, before this wraps up, could I ask a question? And one, again, don't take this and use it because it might not work for you. But one person that really stood out to me, it was sometime last year, I don't remember what role we were hiring for. I wasn't doing the interviews, like 2 of our team members were doing the interviews. But someone asked them, what are both of your roles exactly and why do you love what you do?
Yeah.
And they were like, they came and told me after, like, someone asked us, like, what are our roles and how long have we worked there and what is it that we love about the role? And they wanted to know, like, exactly what their roles were.
And people love talking about themselves. Like, if it gets flipped to the interviewer and they get to talk about cool things they've done and why they love it, like, they love that.
So that was a really great question that someone asked one time that stuck with me.
And I think it's a much better question than, what's the culture like? Because like, I get you. Of course, you want to know about the culture. That's a good thing to want to know about. But ask it in a way that's like, well, what do you mean about the culture? Do you mean, do we have lunch together, or do you mean like, do we care about feedback and innovation and performance? Like, what are you actually asking? Like, come up with a deeper way of asking what you want to know.
Absolutely.
And I think, lastly, back to kind of preparing for interviews the wrong way. The advice of take a breath and take a sec before you answer, excellent.
Yep.
But the other thing that people have to do first is prepare their stories in advance. So you have to go through your experience. You don't know what questions you're going to get asked. There's no way to tell what an interviewer is going to ask you. And honestly, when I'm preparing for an interview, I haven't decided yet. I'm deciding the questions as I think of them in the interview sometimes based on what we're talking about.
Oh, yeah, we go rogue sometimes and start asking other questions, especially if the interview's going well.
Yeah.
Then you want to keep finding out more about this
something.
person. You're like, well, also, here's this question.
So you need stories ready.
Yeah, half of my interview for Nova was talking about the Real Housewives.
I love that.
Who would have predicted that, right?
I know, got me the job.
So you want to have your stories prepped. You want to go through your experience because that's what we know the topic of the interview is going to be. We're going to be talking about what you've done at work before. That's not going to change between now and the interview. So you can go through your memory, think about, okay, what are the things that I've done that I'm proud of that I want to make sure that they get to hear about.
Yep.
I want to walk out of that interview making sure that they know about that big project that I did, because imagine but I didn't get asked a question
It's just
about
like
it.
the bad boss thing. You don't want to wait until you get the perfect boss that's like, hey, what are your goals? What do you want to do? We're weaseling in. We're like, I don't care if you don't ask me about this. I'm going to find a way to talk about it.
I'm going to make sure that I mention this. And so then you get a question about, tell me about a time you dealt with a difficult person or whatever. Instead of picking that one random time that you had a horrible client or whatever, talk about that really tough project that you did that you really want them to know about that also probably had a couple of difficult stakeholders in it. Like, use the questions as an opportunity to talk about your pre-prepared stories. That avoids you rambling because you've decided this is the story. I've prepped it beforehand. You've got a whole bunch of them. Then all you have to do in the interview is match them.
My favourite analogy to give is it's like throwback to year 12, HSC English exam.
Yeah.
You know your set text. Set text is your experience. You know it inside out. You pick out all your quotes beforehand. You've got them memorised. You go in. You don't know if they're going to ask you about belonging or love.
Belonging.
But you're ready.
Belonging.
Right.
I haven't heard that in so long.
And you can,
journeys. Yeah.
and you can adapt. Doesn't matter what the question is. You stick your quotes in
That's
and you
right.
link them up and make it work.
You
So-
don't know the exam question, but you've got all your stuff prepped. It's the same concept.
Have your stories so you
Yeah.
aren't going, oh, I can't really think off the top of my head.
And
Yes.
you don't want to be remembering on the spot. That's really difficult.
That's when you turn into smooth brain, no thoughts.
Yep.
Yeah.
No one's home.
yeah. And you're like panicking and then it gets worse and you're sweating. And then you also want to just not think of them, but you want to structure them as well. They need a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yep.
You can use star, you can use car. They're all the same. We talk about situation, what I did, end result. It's the same thing. If you've told a story about like some tea, something that happened on the weekend, you know how to tell a story. This
Your
is
car
not
breaking down.
This is not new to anyone. You're like, you set the scene first. So I'm on the highway, right? And the car
Car's
makes
flying
this
past.
right? And you're setting the scene. So that's the situation. Then what happened? And then my car starts slowing down. And so I'm pressing the accelerator. That's the what I did, what happened. And then what was the end result? You might talk about, okay, then I called this person.
Stranger
and then
ended
someone
up giving
came.
me a lift back to work.
And then so I made it to work on time. Like that's your result, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody knows how to tell a story like that.
100%.
We just go into an interview and forget that we're human and we forget how to communicate and we turn into like, oh, I'm in interview mode.
And-
I know.
And I'm meant
It's
to
so
use
funny, isn't
smart
it? And we're
words.
just there on the
Yes.
other end. It's like, especially us, it's like, where does cool girls? Like,
Yes.
it's
my
not that
chat.
serious, just
try
like
to-
tell us some stories.
And at the start, you mentioned that people go to like robotic and this
the
need
script.
to sound smart. We are like, just speak like a human. A lot of
Yeah.
people tend to use heaps of buzzwords because they think that it makes them sound intelligent. So they're like, yeah, well, I managed stakeholder relationships categorically to overcome. And you're like, what are you saying?
what do you
does that
mean?
mean?
What did
Yeah.
you do?
Just speak in people terms. Just
exactly
normal
right.
words.
You can actually perform worse the more you try.
yeah.
If you go that way and it's your dream job and you put all this pressure on yourself because you're so intimidated by amazing Brittney who you're in love with and you want to work at Fate or whatever.
Well, that's
and
why
you-
I don't do the interviews at Fate anymore. I've stepped away from
People
it.
are
So people are not,
starstruck.
because they're nervous already.
Yeah,
and
they're
then,
distracted. They're like, I'm in the room with Brittney.
Yeah. So I don't have anything to do with that
you
anymore
should
because
be on an earpiece. And
I
like
should. I'd
someone
like
just-
to. Or sometimes if it's like a role that I'm going to be
Yeah.
like working directly with, I'll sit behind the laptop. So I'm listening, but they don't
Nice.
think that I'm there.
Yeah.
There's like two other girls like on the
that's so
screen, but
clever.
I still might want to like hear their answers and give them like a
You're in
soundboard.
incognito mode.
I am.
Just
I'm a
shades
fly on
on.
the
and you're
wall.
typing to them like, ask them this, I want to know. And they're
I'm
like,
a fly on the wall.
I've just had a thought. I need to ask you about this question.
Yeah. Well, this has been amazing. I think we're going to keep you in the studio a bit longer and we're going to do another little bonus episode because I come out with my
Great.
bonus episodes every week as well. So stay tuned for that because that'll be coming out after this episode. But we're going to end today's episode like I do with everyone. I have a tip of the week that I give to everyone. It doesn't have to be about anything that we've spoken about.
Okay.
It could be just a life hack or it could be something about interviewing, which I feel like might be really beneficial, although I feel like we've given about 5,000 tips
Yeah,
in this
yeah.
episode so far. So to either or both of you have a tip of the week that you can share.
Ooh.
I've thought of one. This is a piece of advice that I give all the time. It particularly applies to workplaces. People will make decisions about your career in rooms that you're not in. They will be discussing you. They will be making decisions about you and what happens to you and what they think about you. Make sure you have advocates in that room. Don't underestimate the fact that someone like a manager you don't even report to or a colleague who you sometimes interact with are going to put their hand up and go, yep, I back that. I really like working with that person. That it goes so far. I've been in those rooms. I've seen those conversations. That's my big tip.
I love that. Xander's sitting over there with his mouth open.
No, because I just think it's really good advice. And don't isolate yourself from the office.
Somebody
Facts.
is making a decision about your career and you're not there and you want to make sure that someone in that room is going, yep, I think that's a good decision.
I love that.
All right, my tip is not that exciting, but my partner said it to me recently and I just had a light bulb moment. He said, you don't owe a book anything. in the past year, I've been trying to force my way through books. Like, you know, when you're in it and you're not loving it and you feel like you have to push through.
So
in
you don't need to finish the book.
You don't need to finish the book.
I love it.
You don't
Life
owe a
is
book
too short.
anything.
Just abandon. You already know in the first few chapters, if it's not, you don't owe a book anything.
Yeah.
I love it.
End it.
Everyone out there is going to be like, yeah, because they're like stuck
No
in this
more
book
reading.
right now.
On to the next one.
Yeah.
Oh, I
move
love
on.
it. Oh, well, this has been amazing chatting with you both. I feel like I could talk to you both for hours because I feel like we're just speaking the same language. So thank you so much for being on. Do you want to tell us where everyone can find you?
Yeah, check us out at interviewboss.com.au or follow us on Instagram, and go listen to the pod wherever you're listening to this podcast.
Love it. Slay. Slay.